Last flow, flow of security. I can't believe I'm getting this done. Security flows. I could show you the insecurities, but you tend to know those. Here's my argument on the security flows. Obviously, America tends to be a big exporter of security, still will be. We're shifting, that arrow's purposeful, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Why? Navy doesn't have anything to do in the Atlantic, so they got to do stuff in the Pacific. Boots on the ground, we've done that whole drill. Now we start pulling them back. And what we send, more symmetricized forces. The symmetricization, which is hard to say, of the long war. It's a big learning process of the last decade. And the bin Laden takedown, very emblematic. Our badasses versus their badasses. And most of our badasses are going to be robotic over time. Plus, we're exporting arms like crazy right now to two places. Persian Gulf, East Asia. Big surprise. It's Iran containment, it's China containment. China is doing its keep America out routine. So we're fighting this war with the Chinese arms race right now to no effective purpose or end when we really need their help elsewhere, because they are starting to move in slowly through military arms sales first, more and more bodies, Africa, the Middle East. So the Middle East is coming under new management in terms of superpowers, because one is going bankrupt and pulling away, and one is getting much more incentivized to show up. It's all about economics. We got a new national military strategy. It says Asia is the future. Comes out like the day the Arab Spring takes off. There's strategic planning for you. I'll tell you, Africa, Arab Spring, there's your future. State splitting, all sorts of chaotic stuff. Most of it quite handleable. It's not going to be big war. It's going to be small stuff. Bodies matter, though. So when people talk about taking the army, taking a third of it out, I mean, that really is pretty nutty. But America's got a long history of nuttiness. How superpowers co-evolve. Here's where I'm going next, and this is probably a book I'm going to start writing in the next few weeks. Well, a couple months. Looking at the 2030 time space. I'm going to make this argument. Who's going to contend in the 2030 time space? Why do I pick 2030? I'm thinking in terms of the world experiencing a populist anger right now all across the planet. I mean, Dalian, West London, Libya, I mean, they're all complaining about the same things. Jobs and identity, okay? And leadership, they don't see providing protection for identity and the jobs. So I see a populist anger across the planet. I see a progressive era having to come. I see that progressive era coming mostly in terms of great powers adjusting to each other, seeing who can reform fastest to become most efficient, most powerful, not get left behind as others move forward. So I base it on fear. This is not Teddy Roosevelt just being a nice guy. This is the nasty Teddy Roosevelt. So let's look at the contenders. Europe, Japan, not enough babies. Let me be blunt. Therefore, they're getting a lot older. Shrinking militaries. This guy hasn't had a combat casualty since 1945. That is not a strategic ally. That is a glass jaw, just waiting to be crushed. Forget about it. Here's the brick. I'm not putting South Africa in there, please. I'm looking at these numbers. Russia, great book on this, Dmitry Trenin's recent one out of Carnegie. It's Europe worse. I mean, frankly, look at the numbers. 2% of the world's population, 2% of the global GDP. This is not a serious contender. A lot of good things are going to happen in Russia when things warm up, but it's not going to be a serious superpower contender. Brazil will be a superpower in everything except the military, because it doesn't need to be a military superpower. It's a wonderful neighborhood. Too bad. So now we're looking at just 3 contenders across the board superpowers. All have million-man armies. These guys got no overseas bases, no culture of maintenance or sustainment, no combat experience in a long time. These guys are mostly worried about the other guys and Pakistan. We are battle-tested, but we are tired. In terms of gaining labor, key indicator of strength in the future, demographics. China starts losing. We gain a couple dozen, add 100 million people between now and 2050. But about half that much by 2030. India is going to gain 100 million workers between now and 2030, which means they're going to steal factory Asia floor. Boom, it's going to shift over. terms of expanding interests, no doubt, no doubt, weariness again. In terms of per capita income, 2030 time frame, still very rich, certainly richer, quadrupling from today. And these guys will be plenty rich, meaning if you get a democracy above 10,000, they tend to be immortal, Fareed Zakaria's point. But if we ask ourselves, where's the real rivalry in this trio? No question, it's these two. Over Afghanistan, Pakistan, the Indian Ocean, Southeast Asia, Tibet, they fought a war, got a border. Compared to China and the United States, nothing. So let's look at it in terms of dominant narratives, because this is where my thinking goes. Power projection capability, I'm keeping it vague, just like how powerful are you over time. Dominant narrative on the United States, linear decline. Post-American world, forget about it, lost. Imperial exhaustion. Can't be rectified, except we've done it before. In fact, we do it on a regular basis. So the progressive era I see coming after the populism, which I think we'll process faster than anybody because we've done it many times, means the next morning in America comes, and eventually we start to rebound. But let's stick with the dominant narrative. Let's talk about China. Dominant narrative, China goes on forever. China has a $20 trillion economy in 2050. China's already more powerful than America. You ask your average college student, they see the skits on Saturday Night Live, you've seen them. My daughter will tell you, China's kicking our ass in this world, more powerful than we are. China's going to hit all those walls. So China's not going to experience anything other than the usual S-curve on the growth. And when I look at America versus China, we may be suffering this perceived passing, but the dangerous one is going to be this one, when China realizes its rule of the world is going to be exceedingly short. But back to the dominant narratives, let's throw India in now. Slower version of China, except the demographic dividend. India has more labor than China come 2030, 50% more by 2050. That's destiny. So when I look at these three, I see a lot of back and forth between them. These are the three big economies, three big militaries, three big cultural forces in the world. And it's a tight cluster. What's interesting is how tied up we already are on our current situation. China, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran. What's interesting is how this thing is the cockpit of all the relationships right now. 9/11 brings us back to Afghanistan, puts us in a certain situation with Pakistan, puts us at odds with these guys, creates more friction there, makes impossible any sort of détente, because these are yet another people we're trying to keep out of Afghanistan, because we're going to make Afghanistan work without having any help from the locals, except Pakistan. And Obama's continued this from Bush. And this is considered strategic thinking. I mean, it's pathetic. We put both India and the United States against China in the region. Why? Why? These are the guys most likely to stabilize this and this. So why would you want to keep them out? My God, invite them in. So you ask yourself, is Afghanistan worth all that? Especially once you get this guy. And you consummate that narrative. Why not unwind, contain, encourage as much as possible? You want China to run the place? Be my guest. And run this too while you're at it. Then you got much more flexibility with India. You start bringing China into a more explicit partnership relationship, and you're free to deal with these guys. So why not go back to a more soft position on land? I want to kill bad guys, but go offshore in terms of the balancing. I'll be happy to take questions for 15 minutes.